Thank you very much. As you may know, I'm a multiple personality. Any other multiples with us? Very good. Next year, the IRS is going to let us take them as deductions. You already know that. But yes, I'm Swami. I'm Steve. Last night, I channeled Swami Bhayantananda. This morning, Swami is channeling me. So we're all set. And if you weren't here last night, you can take Swami's time travel workshop and be there then and go back and see it. And he's offering that workshop last weekend. So thank you very much. You know, the universe has such a natural sense of humor if we pay attention. A couple of months ago, I did a show in Kansas City with a musical comedy artist named Greg Tamblyn. Maybe you've heard of him. And as we were doing the promo for the show, we realized that Marianne Williamson called me the Mark Twain of our generation. Larry Dawsey called him the Mark Twain of our generation. And we're looking at what do we do? And I went, I got it. Two Twains on the same twack. With one locomotive to make everybody laugh. And so we had a good time with the show. So this is going to be more about the natural sense of humor of the universe and some ways that you can use humor to heal, which means to restore wholeness. Natural sense of humor of the universe. A number of years ago, Trudy, my wife, was dismantling her parents' home in Michigan. And in the Midwest, of course, the homes have attics and basements, meaning you can collect a lot more stuff. And her parents were collectors of stuff. And imagining, I think, one day that they would have this big garage sale. And you look at some of these things they collected, and you realize these things had to be manufactured specifically for a garage sale. It's a factory in New Jersey that makes stuff for garage sales. I don't know if you knew that. And she also knows, Trudy knew, that my great spiritual path in love since I was a kid has been baseball. And so out of all of the tons, and I mean tons, because there was actually a dumpster with a ton of stuff that they were throwing away, tons and tons of things that these people collected, one piece of baseball memorabilia that Trudy presented me with. And it was a Kellogg's Corn Flake baseball card, a holographic baseball card, Yogi Berra baseball card. And if you turned it this way, you see Yogi Berra's face. You turned it that way, you see him batting, and I'm doing this. I'm going, Trudy, out of all of the tens of thousands of different baseball cards you could have gotten, you bring me a shape-shifting yogi. He was my first yogi, by the way, as a kid. Very metaphysical. He wore number 8. So every time he slid into base, he would flash the infinity sign. I'm sure you got that. Anyway, time release later on. So anyway, my favorite true story about the healing power of humor, John Kenneth Galbraith, the economist, tells the story. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, there were American and Soviet delegates meeting to discuss the possible trade between the two countries. And when news of the missile crisis hit, everything stopped, and there was tremendous tension in the room. And finally, one of the Soviet delegates rather timidly raised his hand. He said, I suggest we each go around and tell a joke. And he volunteered to start. His joke was, what's the difference between capitalism and communism? In capitalism, man exploits man. In communism, it's the other way around. And the joke broke the trance of separation. Everybody burst out laughing. The tension was released. And people were reminded that beyond all of the isms, there's the unity of the heart. Very powerful, transformational moment. And so when I heard that story many, many, many years ago, before I started doing comedy, I recognized that my presentation with comedy, I wanted to have that vibration of clearing the air, of doing a healing, of restoring wholeness, and establishing truth. And so in the process of my learning about comedy and participating for all these years, I've come up with 4 healing qualities of humor that I'm going to share with you. The first is that humor reminds us that we're bigger than our situation. So years before doing this, before I decided to do comedy, I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was working as a freelance writer. And I made this declaration, I'm going to do comedy as a full-time career. And the universe was so incredibly cooperative that all my writing jobs dried up instantly. I went through what I call my Baroque period. I was so Baroque, I was hiding from the landlord. We were behind in our rent 3 months. It was very stressful. And at the time, Trudy, my wife Trudy, and I were reading every morning from A Course in Miracles as a spiritual practice. One morning, the lesson was, you're not upset for the reason you think. And boy, that one really ticked me off. I knew why I was upset. We had no money, couldn't pay our bills. And as the universe, again, has an amazing sense of humor, just as we're done reading this lesson, the telephone rings. Trudy gets the phone. She says, Steve, it's the landlord. What should I tell him? I said, how about you're not upset for the reason you think? And we had a good laugh, and within a short amount of time, we had the money to pay the rent, and it was all okay. It reminded us we were bigger than our situation. At around the same time, my favorite uncle was having lots of health challenges, and he was in the hospital, and they weren't telling him anything. And he was depressed, and I called him up. I had no idea what I was going to say. But when you practice cosmic comic consciousness, farce fields show up, and this joke came to mind. And as soon as he answered the phone, I told him about a man who needed a very serious operation. And he goes to the finest surgeon in the country. Operation is successful. Surgeon presents him with the bill. He says, I'm sorry, I can't afford to pay this. The surgeon says, what about your health insurance? And he laughs. He says, who has health insurance? Surgeon's a little upset. He says, okay, look, pay me whatever you can. The guy says, you know what? I have no money at all. I can't pay you anything. Now the surgeon's very upset. He said, if you knew you couldn't pay, why did you come to the finest surgeon in the country? And the guy says, because when it comes to my health, money is no object. And of course, my uncle laughed because this joke was that it was a joke about the medical system that held his fate in the balance. And then he told me a joke, and I still remember what it was. It was about a very well-known minister who dies and goes to heaven and arrives at the pearly gates at about the same time as a cab driver from New York. Now they let the cab driver in, and the minister is waiting and waiting. Finally, he calls the attending angel over. He says, excuse me, I'm a world famous minister. Why did you let the cab driver in? I'm waiting out here. Angel says, well, because when you preached, everybody slept. But when he drove, everybody prayed. And my uncle and I went back and forth for 20 minutes telling jokes, and at the end of that time, I could hear the vitality in his voice. So even when we're in the most dire of circumstances, if we make the choice to find the humor, find a joke hidden in the picture, to laugh, then it transforms the situation. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl talked about being in a Nazi death camp during World War II. He and a fellow inmate made a pact. Each day they would find something to laugh about. Because again, if you can laugh in that hellish situation, there's a part of you that cannot be imprisoned. It's like that old Far Side cartoon, which is a devil scene in fire and brimstone. And there's this guy wheeling a wheelbarrow filled of ashes, and he's whistling a happy tune. And one of the devils is saying, you know, I don't think we're getting through to this guy. So there really was a book called Laughter in Hell, talking about humor and the Holocaust. And one of the jokes that actually circulated among the inmates involved these two Jewish guys who decide that they're going to assassinate Hitler. They know Hitler's motorcade is going to pass this one intersection at 11 in the morning, and they're waiting for him. 11 in the morning, he doesn't show up. 11:15, 11:30. When he's not there by 11:45, one of the assassins turns to the other and says, gee, I hope nothing's happened to him. So that indicates the kind of leverage, or a better word, leverage, that humor can offer in a dire circumstance, to remind you that you're bigger than your situation. Second quality of laughter is that heart-opening laughter and disarming comedy can disarm. Defenseless comedy can create defenselessness in other people. I was the class comedian. Anybody else class comedian around here? Yeah, actually, the way that you know that God has chosen you, it's the first time that you are in the lunchroom and you make another kid laugh so hard that milk comes out of their nose. It's a sign from God. So I was that kid, and in the projects, and I grew up I spent my deformative years in New York in a housing project, and when the older kids would ask me for money, I'd say, hey, I live here. If I had any money, would I be living here? And they would laugh and leave me alone. So I was doing stand-up for money at the age of 8. It was my money, but, it was okay. And, of course, I was told to get serious, like everybody else. Get serious, get serious. And finally, I got serious. I'm in college. I'm trying to blend in, trying to be unobtrusive. I'm in a sociology lecture hall with 250 other very, very bored people. I'm in the state somewhere between sleep and deep sleep. And out of the corner of my ear, I hear the professor, and she's talking about social mores. And she said, and who can define for us social mores? And without thinking, I'm up. And in kind of a comedic Tourette's, what comes out is, when the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie at some more. I went, and everybody laughed, except the professor. She gave me a D. But I earned that D, But as a kid, I loved humor and I loved baseball. And one of my favorite baseball characters when I was a kid was Casey Stengel. He was manager of the Yankees. True story. Fans in New York, when he was a rookie, hated him. For some reason, he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Fans in New York disliked him. They would boo him every time he showed his face. One day, Casey Stengel comes to the plate in New York to bat. Fans boo him. He tips his cap, and a little sparrow flies out from under his cap. Everyone in the ballpark stood up and cheered, and they never booed him again. Now think of one playful gesture opening the hearts of 20,000 New Yorkers. So the moral of the story is, if you're going to flip somebody the bird, make it a real bird. I get to do a lot of really fun events, and serious, I'm not making this up. I spoke at a conference called the Holistic Lawyers Conference in the Florida Keys, Law as a Healing Profession, 250 holistic lawyers, and serious. After the event, one of them came up and told me a story. He said he was involved in a very contentious negotiation with another attorney. And at one point, the other guy made an offer that was like an insult. And this guy's furious. He's furious. And the only thing that could come out of his mouth is, nyah, nyah, nyah. Well, the other lawyer goes, oh, wise guy, eh? And the two of them are doing Three Stooges stuff back and forth till they both burst out laughing and they worked the whole thing out. One time I was involved in a really, really difficult negotiation with a difficult person. And again, you ever been in a situation where every word you say digs the hole deeper? Well, finally I hung up in disgust. And then I remembered something from being a kid in New York. On the playground, we had something called the do-over. I went, do-over. So I called the person back and I said, hi, this is Steve Bhaerman. Did someone just call you pretending to be me? And we laughed and worked the whole thing out. So when you apply humor defenselessly, it creates defenselessness in other people. And sometimes the universe will do this for us. Years ago, many, many years ago, when I was a long-haired hippie, as opposed to now when I'm longing for hair, Trudy, she says every morning, she says, I think I'm going to let my hair down today. And I said, yeah, my hair let me down again. So. But anyway, my friend and I were traveling across country, and we stopped at a place to eat in Colorado. They refused to serve us because of how we looked. And because we was waiting there, and finally we figured out they're not going to serve us. And we were really angry. And we realized the place is going to close in a little bit. There was a construction site across the street. We were going to throw a brick through their window. That's how angry we were. And so we had about a half hour to kill. We go to the gas station to get gas. Gas station guy takes a look at us and he says, "Get out of here. We don't serve no Homo sapiens here." And me and my friend just burst out laughing. We went, "Wow, these people are too stupid to harm." And we just laughed, and everything all got dissolved in this laughter. So the universe kept us from going to jail probably and getting a haircut. So disarming laughter, defenseless humor, disarms other people. We'll talk more about that in this play shop that we're doing later. You'll get to learn how to do that. Third quality of humor is it allows us to deal with the shadow pieces of life, the things that might not be pleasant for us to talk about. Maybe there's a little bit of personal hypocrisy involved. So my favorite shadow story is about a little town in West Texas about 100 years ago. Local madam comes to the minister. She says, "Reverend, I want to make amends for my life. I want to donate everything I have to your church." He says, "Well, ma'am, I'll need to think about this. Come back tomorrow." She came back the next day. He'd made up his mind. He says, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't accept your offer." And she left. One of the townspeople says, "Reverend, we need a new building. Why did you turn down her generous offer?" He says, "Because her money is tainted money." The guy looked at the minister and he said, "What do you mean her money? It's our money." The other aspect of the shadow are the things in our lives that might have been challenging to us. And I grew up in a really loving and wonderful family, but I did have a Jewish mother. The archetypal Jewish mother is a great cook who worries about everything. So my mother was one for two. She worried about everything, except her cooking. And her mom was a great cook, but it skipped a generation. In fact, it skipped 2 generations. When you're not naturally gifted at something, the tendency is to overdo. So she overcooked everything. And I think in her generation, there was a belief that there was something very, very dangerous in vegetables that had to be killed. So she cooked vegetables to death. I didn't have a green vegetable till I was an adult. They were khaki when they were served. But my mom worried about everything. And this is true. I'm not making this up. I took a job doing tree work, taking down trees that had Dutch elm disease. My mother was afraid that I would catch Dutch elm disease. That's how nature-oriented we were in New York. I said, "Mom, people don't get Dutch elm disease. Dogs get it." She goes, "Dogs get it?" She was worried about Buster. She said, "What happens to dogs?" I said, "They lose their bark." Thank you for laughing. You're healing my childhood. So I've been collecting Jewish mother stories, and one of my favorites, a young man becomes very wealthy and very successful, traveling around the world, and he loves his mom. He wants to get her something really, really special. He's in a marketplace in South America. He sees this mynah bird that speaks 12 languages. He pays $1,500, which was a lot of money in those days, $1,500 to have this bird shipped back to his mother's apartment in New York. He gets back to the States a couple of weeks later. He's so excited. He calls her. He says, "Well, Ma, how did you like the gift?" She says, "It was delicious." He can't believe it. He says, "Mom, don't tell me you ate that bird. The bird spoke 12 languages." She said, "He should have said something." So thank you for casting light on my shadow here. So healing quality of humor, it allows us to deal with the shadow pieces of our lives. The fourth and maybe the most important quality of humor is it reminds us that life is a joyful experience. You know, that wonderful little passage from Khalil Gibran talking about sorrow and joy. They're actually all emotions. Emotion is energy and motion. And one can flow very easily to the other if we allow them to. We'll be talking more about that in the workshop and play shop and how to help move that energy along. Famous story about this monk, this old monk. And his job is to translate the ancient scrolls down into catacombs. And he's working down there one day, and all of a sudden the other monks hear a scream, and they come running down, and the old monk is shaking, and he's saying, "It says celebrate, not celibate." Dang, Not that there's anything wrong with the celibate lifestyle. I was celibate for 14 years. But when I turned 15, I said, enough of that. What else you got? The other thing about celebration, it's celebrating our differences. With political correctness, people have been kind of afraid to emphasize those things. But when we do it with a loving heart, good things happen. There's a wonderful representation of heaven and hell as it applies to the countries in Europe. In heaven, the police are English, the mechanics are German, the cooks are French, the lovers are Italian, and it's all run by the Swiss. Heaven. In hell, the police are German, the cooks are English, the mechanics are French, the lovers are Swiss, and it's all run by the Italians. It's so totally different. Everybody always laughs at that. The other aspect of celebrating life is allowing yourself to commit random acts of comedy. And sometimes they're a surprise, and sometimes they're planned. And one of the great things about the sharing that Trudy and I will be doing later, it's really helping people cultivate this sense of playfulness so that we light people up wherever we go. We light people up. We were just on the East Coast, and we're at the toll booth at the Delaware Memorial Bridge, and this woman who is a toll taker, she was this light. She was so happy. And I said, "Thank you so much. You're the first. I've always wanted to say this to somebody in a toll booth." And I said, "What's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this?" And she laughed and laughed, and she said how much she enjoys looking into cars and, kind of flirting with the pets and with the children and smiling and so on. And here's somebody who's doing darshan, for thousands of people in the course of a week. She's sharing her light. We all can learn how to do this, whether we're comedians or not. So I'm really excited about that. But since I've been doing this really all my life, it's something that comes so natural to me that farce fields do show up in situations. So when Trudy and I lived in Texas, we had this favorite Chinese restaurant that we used to go to, and the food was great. But this one time, Trudy bites down, and there's some steel wool in the stir fry. And of course, we called the owner over, and they were very, very embarrassed, so they gave us our meals for free. So now I always carry steel wool with me. But it was kind of a tense meal because they had so much pride in their food and everything that they were uptight while we're eating. And finally, mercifully, the meal is over. They bring the fortune cookies. I called the waiter over, and he goes, "Oh my God, now what?" I said, "Excuse me, there's a piece of paper in my cookie." Several years ago, I was doing a program for Kaiser Permanente up in Northern California, something called the Physician Wellness Program. And boy, what an oxymoron that was. I mean, this was the most uptight, tense, stressed out bunch of physicians who had not healed themselves that I've ever met. But I'm noticing that most of them are from third world countries. So I'm doing the Swami, it's working okay, but the universe had a better idea. I'm in the middle of my presentation, all of a sudden I'm interrupted by the PA, and we hear, "Your attention please, your attention please. Will the owner of a white Explorer, license number BK3450, please move your vehicle, you're blocking traffic." And I look at the PA, I look at these third world people, and the Swami says, "I've always thought that most of the problems in this world have been caused by white Explorers." Again, I can't take credit for that. I have taken cash for it, but I can't take credit for it because when you're in a certain zone, anyone can be a receiver of that information. And it has a lot to do with relaxing, not trying, and simply being in this place of playfulness. I'm sure everybody in this room, you've been with friends and people who you're comfortable with, and all of a sudden somebody says something funny, somebody else does, and all of a sudden it's just, and everybody is so unself-conscious that this humor is arising naturally. So if you do join Trudy and I later, we'll help you do that and certainly provide some laughs. And so finally, what I wish for you is that the farce be with you. As the Swami would say, namaste and namasko. Thank you so very much. Bye.